The stars of the Vitha corridor never seemed to change. They hung frozen in the darkness, illuminating a region of space so lifeless that even time itself felt reluctant to pass through it. For centuries, the corridor had been dismissed as a cosmic wasteland. There were no habitable worlds, no rich asteroid belts, no ancient ruins, and no strategic trade lanes. It was a place the Galactic Conclave had long ago forgotten. Patrol ships crossed it only out of obligation, performing routine inspections every few weeks before hurrying back to civilized space. No captain lingered there. There was simply nothing worth finding. That was why no one paid much attention when the ISV Pale Meridian emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the corridor 3 days earlier. The Conclave patrol that detected the vessel, logged its arrival, confirmed it carried no obvious weapons, and continued its route without concern. To them, it was just another ship passing through empty space. They had no way of knowing that, for the first time in centuries, the Voitha corridor was no longer empty. The ship was registered in their database, a human civilian freighter. Old model, slow engine output, licensed for minor cargo runs along approved trade routes. Its hull was dented and patched in several places. Its signal was weak. It looked like every other tired human ship that drifted through the outer edges of conclave space, carrying low-value goods and causing no trouble. The patrol logged it, marked it as non-threat, and moved on. That was their first mistake. It would not be their last. Inside the Pale Meridian, Commander Yael Oren sat in a chair that was older than most of the crew. She held a cup of coffee in both hands and stared at the main screen in front of her. The screen showed the corridor outside the stars, the dark, the slow drift of nothing. She had been staring at it for 3 days. She did not look tired. She did not look bored. She looked like someone who was thinking very hard about something, and had been for a very long time. She was a small woman, quiet by nature, with short dark hair and careful eyes that missed very little. The crew of the Pale Meridian respected her deeply, not because she gave loud speeches or made dramatic decisions, but because she never made a wrong one. Every choice she made came after long, quiet thought, and when she spoke, it was usually worth hearing. "Eris," she said softly. The ship's AI responded from the speakers above her. Its voice was calm and flat, with just the faintest tone of dry humor underneath everything it said. "Still watching, Commander. Nothing has changed in the last 4 minutes, which means nothing has changed in the last 3 days, and the convoy on schedule. It will enter the corridor in approximately 11 hours. Oren took a slow sip of coffee. "Good. You don't sound excited." "I'm not," she said. "Excited people make noise. We don't make noise." Eris said nothing to that. It was a fair point. The Galactic Conclave was not a cruel organization by nature. It was simply old. It had been built by the oldest spacefaring species, the Vathrii, the Colon, the Sen, over 400 years ago, and in those 400 years, it had grown large and comfortable and certain of itself. The Conclave decided which species were ready to join the galaxy's table, which ones needed more time, and which ones were not worth thinking about at all. Humanity fell firmly into the last group. Humans had been discovered 60 years ago, late arrivals to the interstellar stage, still using early faster-than-light drives, still arguing among themselves about politics and resources. The Conclave had looked at them and given them a Class 3 emerging species rating. Class 3 meant not dangerous, not useful, not important. It meant humans were allowed to trade on the outer edges of Conclave space. It meant their ships were allowed through certain approved corridors. It meant their ambassadors were allowed to attend Conclave meetings in the back row without a vote. It meant in simple terms that the Conclave did not take humans seriously, had never taken them seriously, had no plan to start. 60 years of human ambassadors standing in front of the High Chamber, asking for equal status. 60 years of polite refusals. 60 years of being told they were too young, too emotional, too primitive for full membership. 60 years of watching other species with better weapons, stronger economies, longer histories, sit at the center table, while humans sat at the edge and were given nothing. Most species would have given up after a decade or two. Humans were not most species. The convoy that was coming through the Vitha corridor carried a treaty. Not just any treaty, the Century Binding, a conclave document that had been quietly prepared over the last 4 years by a committee of senior conclave diplomats. The treaty, once signed by the required majority of conclave members, would formally restrict human expansion into deep space for the next 100 years. It would close off trade corridors, limit human ship production, and block any future applications for full conclave membership, until a review, the treaty itself, made nearly impossible to pass. It was, in simple terms, a document designed to make sure humanity stayed small and stayed quiet for the next century. The conclave had not told humanity about it. Why would they? Humans had no vote. Humans had no say. Humans were Class 3. The treaty was an internal matter. What the conclave did not know, what they could not have imagined, was that humanity had known about the century binding for 2 years. Every meeting where it was discussed had been recorded. Every draft that was written had been read. Every vote count had been tracked. Humanity had known what was coming long before the ink was ready, and they had been preparing. Eris spoke again after a long silence. "Commander, the Conclave Patrol has left the corridor. We are alone. Run the check again," Orin said. "Passive sensors only. No active scan. All systems in sleep mode, except core processing and life support. To anyone looking at us right now, we are a dead ship drifting. To anyone looking at us or in repeated, but they're not looking. They haven't looked closely at a human ship in 40 years. She put down her coffee and leaned forward slightly in her chair. "Let's make sure the convoy gets comfortable coming in. Don't touch a single thing until I give the word." "Understood." The crew around her moved quietly, doing small tasks, checking small screens, speaking in low voices. There was no fear in the room. There was focus. There was the particular kind of calm that comes not from ignorance of danger, but from preparations so deep and complete that danger has already been considered, measured, and planned for. 11 hours later, the first lights of the conclave diplomatic convoy appeared at the far end of the Vatha corridor. Commander Orin watched them come. She did not move. She did not speak. She waited until all 7 convoy ships were fully inside the corridor. Then she looked at Eris's small camera above the main screen and said 2 words: "Begin." The lead ship of the conclave convoy was called the Eternal Accord. It was a large vessel, wide and silver, built in the Vey tradition of making ships that looked important. Its bridge was 3 levels high, lined with tall, curved screens, and staffed by officers from 4 different species. At the center of all of it, in a chair that was raised slightly above everything else, sat Admiral Sathar. He was Vori. His kind had been traveling the stars since before human civilization had invented writing. He was tall, gray-skinned, with 4 narrow eyes that moved independently of each other, always watching different parts of the room at once. He wore his rank with the easy confidence of a person who had never seriously been questioned. He had been chosen to escort the century binding to the conclave signing chamber, not because he was the best military mind in the fleet, though he believed he was, but because he was trusted. Trusted to be careful. Trusted to keep the treaty safe. Trusted above all, not to be surprised. He looked at the corridor around his convoy and saw nothing. Just dead space. Just stars. He allowed himself a small moment of boredom. That was his first mistake. It started without any warning at all. One moment, everything on the Eternal Accord was working normally. The next moment, nothing was. The propulsion system dropped first. Not an explosion, not a failure. It simply stopped responding. The engines were on. Power was flowing. Nothing was broken. The ship just did not move. The helm officer tapped his controls, looked at his screen, and said in a confused voice that he did not know what was happening. Then the weapon systems went dark. Then long-range communications. Then the sensor array not gone completely, but reduced to a narrow local picture, like going from seeing the whole ocean to seeing only a small puddle. It happened to all 7 ships at the same time. The convoy, which had been moving in a neat formation, slowly went still. 7 large vessels full of highly trained conclave officers and state-of-the-art equipment floating in a dead corridor and unable to do anything about it. Admiral Seth Carr stood up from his chair. "Report," he said. The reports came from every station at once. None of them agreed on what was wrong, because nothing was wrong. Not in any way they understood. Systems were running. Power was present. Equipment was functional. The ships were simply being held in place and shut down by something that left no fingerprint on any instrument they had. "Scan for the source," Sathar said. His science officer, a young Callan named Tyrath, ran 3 different scans. Then she ran them again. Then she looked up slowly and said in a voice that was careful and a little embarrassed, "Admiral, I cannot find a source. There is no detectable emission, no energy field, no wave pattern. Whatever is doing this is not showing up on any spectrum I have." Sethar's 4 eyes all turned to face the same direction at once, a thing his species only did when they were truly alarmed. "That is not possible." "I know," Tyth said. And yet on the main screen, still visible in the near distance, was the ISV Pale Meridian, old, battered, drifting slowly, doing absolutely nothing, according to every instrument they had. Aboard the Pale Meridian, Era spoke in a quiet, satisfied tone. "All 7 convoy vessels are immobilized. Long-range comms blocked, weapons locked. They are currently running their 3rd diagnostic cycle. They will not find anything." Commander Oren was already moving toward the back of the bridge. "How long do we have before they try short-range comms to the nearest conclave relay?" "Short range is also blocked. They don't know that yet. They will figure it out in approximately 8 minutes. We need 6. She looked at the 2 small teams waiting by the corridor door. 12 people in total, dressed in plain clothes with no markings of any kind. "Go." The teams moved. They were fast, and they were quiet. 2 small shuttles left the Pale Meridian from a lower bay. Not from the main docking port, but from a secondary release point hidden inside a panel on the ship's underside that looked from the outside exactly like a patch on an old hole. The shuttles crossed the distance to the nearest convoy vessel in under 2 minutes, docking at a maintenance port that conclave ships had on their lower hull for emergency access. They had studied the layout for 2 years. They knew every corridor, every door, every system. The data cores of the Century Binding Treaty were stored in a locked room on the Eternal Accord's middle deck. It took the team 4 minutes to reach it, 1 minute to access it, and 40 seconds to copy everything and make their adjustments. Not to steal the treaty that would have been noticed immediately. Instead, they made small, specific changes. Language that locked humans out was quietly replaced. Clauses that blocked human membership were softened into review processes that could actually be passed. The restrictions on ship production were removed entirely. When the treaty was printed and signed at the conclave chamber, it would say almost the same things it said now, just not the most important ones. The teams were back on the Pale Meridian in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Eris noted this with approval. Teams recovered. All systems returning to sleep mode. "Shall I release the convoy?" "Give it 1 more minute," Oren said, sitting back down and picking up her coffee. She waited. She drank. Then she said, "Release them." The jamming field, a human-designed system that had taken 11 years to perfect and produced no detectable emission in any known spectrum, switched off as quietly as it had switched on. On every conclave ship in the corridor, systems came back online one by one. As if waking slowly from a dream, the Pale Meridian fired up its visible thrusters. Slowly, lazily, it turned in a wide, unhurried arc and began to drift away from the convoy in the direction of the nearest approved human trade route. It looked like a freighter leaving after a rest stop. It looked completely innocent. On the Eternal Accord, Admiral Sathar stood in the middle of his bridge and tried to understand what had just happened. His systems were back. His ships were fine. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was taken. The data cores were checked immediately and confirmed intact. But for 9 minutes and 12 seconds, his entire convoy had been completely helpless. 9 minutes and 12 seconds in which anything could have been done to them, and they would not have been able to stop it. He stared at the Pale Meridian as it slowly moved away. "Do we have anything on that ship?" he asked. Tyrus pulled the file. "Registered human civilian freighter. Class 3 species trade license. Cargo manifest shows agricultural equipment. No weapons registered. No military classification. It's been in the database for 12 years. Scan it." She scanned it, reading standard civilian power output. "Commander. Old engine model, patched hull. Nothing unusual." Seth Carr was quiet for a long moment. Every rational part of his mind told him the human ship was not responsible. His instrument said so. His database said so. Every piece of evidence said so. A civilian freighter from a Class 3 species could not produce a jamming field that left no trace on any sensor array in the Conclave fleet. That was not possible. He told himself this several times. Then he made a decision that came not from logic, but from the particular anger of a powerful person who has just been made to feel small without knowing how. He opened a channel to the other 6 ships of the convoy and said in a cold and certain voice, "I want that human vessel intercepted, boarded, and brought to a full stop. We will search it, and we will question its crew, and if I find anything at all, I will make an example of them." 6 other captains confirmed the order. 12 warships peeled away from different positions across the corridor and began moving toward the pale meridian. Eris watched them come. It calculated their headings, their speeds, and their arrival time. Then it said something it had not said in 3 days. The faintest hint of something that in a human might have been called anticipation. "Commander, they're coming for us." Orin looked at the screen. 12 Conclave warships. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she smiled, just barely, just once, and said quietly, "Good." 12 Conclave warships arranged themselves in a wide circle around the pale meridian. It took them about 20 minutes to get into position. They did it carefully with the practiced precision of a fleet that had done this kind of thing many times before, surrounding smaller vessels, cutting off escape routes, making the point through positioning alone that resistance was not an option. Each of those 12 ships was bigger than the pale meridian. Most of them were 3 times bigger. They were armed with long-range rail systems, energy lances, and missile banks that could crack a small moon if aimed correctly. Their hulls were reinforced Vethori alloy. Their crews were well-trained and well-armed. By any reasonable measurement, this was a completely overwhelming force, sent to stop one old, slow civilian freight hauler. Admiral Sethgar had not come himself. He stayed aboard the Eternal Accord with the treaty and watched through the long-range feed. But he had sent a message that was transmitted to the pale meridian on an open channel, loud enough that every ship in the corridor could hear it. "Attention, human vessel. You are surrounded by conclave military ships. You will cut your engines, open your docking ports, and submit to a full search and crew review. Any resistance will be treated as an act of aggression against the Galactic Conclave. Respond and comply." The message was firm, professional, and carried with it the absolute certainty of a man who had never been told no by anyone smaller than him. The pale meridian did not respond for a full minute. Then, Commander Orin's voice came through. It was quiet, clear, and completely calm. "Message received. Give us a moment." Inside the pale meridian, the bridge was silent. Orin stood in front of her chair. She was not sitting, she was standing, hands at her sides, looking at the screen that showed all 12 conclave ships arranged around them. She had known this moment was coming. She had thought about it many times in many different ways for many years. She had talked about it with her crew. She had talked about it with the people who built this ship. She had talked about it with the people in the quiet offices on Earth, who had first put Project Pale Light on paper 30 years ago. They had all said the same thing. When this moment comes, be sure, because once it happens, there is no going back. The galaxy will see what it sees, and it cannot unsee it. She looked around the bridge. Her crew looked back at her, not afraid. "Ready?" She sat down in her chair. "AUs," she said. "It's time confirming authorization." Ares said Commander Yael Arurin. "Pale light clearance authorization accepted." A short pause. "Ready when you are." She looked at the 12 warships on the screen. She thought for just one moment of all the human ambassadors who had stood in front of the Conclave High Chamber and been laughed at. She thought of the Class 3 rating. She thought of the century-binding treaty sitting in those data cores designed to keep humanity small and quiet and irrelevant for 100 more years. Then she thought of nothing at all. "Uncloak," she said. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. But every conclave officer who was watching those screens remembered those 4 seconds for the rest of their lives. First, the pale meridian itself changed. The hull plating, old, dented, patched, fell away in large sections, releasing magnetically into space and drifting apart to reveal the ship underneath. What was underneath was not a freighter. It was sleek and dark, built in long, clean lines with weapons arrays that were still folded inward, but unmistakably present. The engine ports were larger than any civilian vessel should have. The hull was a material the conclave sensors did not have a classification for. The ship was not enormous. It was not trying to be, but it was clearly, obviously, unmistakably, a warship. A warship that had been wearing the freighter like a coat. The conclave officers watching had about 2 seconds to process this. Then the rest of them appeared to the left of the pale meridian, in a position no one had been watching, because there had been nothing to watch. Space folded slightly, the way air folds above very hot ground, and a second human vessel came into view, larger than the pale meridian, darker, moving slowly, as if it had been waiting there patiently for a long time. Then another to the right, then one above, then two below the convoy's position, then three more at the far end of the corridor, already in a line, engines warm, facing inward. Then one more very close to the Eternal Accord itself, close enough that the Accord's proximity alarm should have been screaming, except the vessel had been within that range for 2 days without triggering a single sensor. 9 additional ships, 10 total, counting the pale meridian. They had all been there the whole time. The corridor, which had been empty dead space for as long as the Conclave could remember, was suddenly full of human warships. They were different sizes and different shapes, but they shared the same design language. Dark, clean, built for function rather than appearance, with no markings that matched anything in the Conclave's database, because they were not in the database, because no one had known they existed. On the bridge of the Eternal Accord, total silence. Admiral Sethar stared at his screen. His 4 eyes had gone to the same position again. His science officer, Tyreth, had stopped typing mid-sentence and was sitting completely still. The comm officer, a young Sen, was holding an active channel open, but had forgotten to say anything into it. Seth Carr found his voice after a long moment. "How?" he said. It was not really a question. It came out like a word someone says when they drop something and cannot believe it has broken. Tyr answered, because she was the one whose job it was to answer. She answered in a very quiet, very careful voice. "The cloaking technology they use does not match any known system in our records. There is no emission, no phase variance, no gravitational displacement on every instrument we have. Those ships were not there, and now they are." She paused. "There are 10 of them. We have 12, but they are positioned." She stopped. She looked at the screen for a moment. "They are positioned so that any firing solution we take crosses the path of at least 2 of our own ships. Every angle, all 12 of us." Seth Carr said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He was surrounded. Not the way he had surrounded the pale meridian lazily, confidently. The way a large animal circles something small, he was surrounded by something that had thought much further ahead than he had. Something that had chosen this corridor, chosen this moment, chosen exactly where to be, and exactly when to show itself, with the total precision of a plan that had been running for a very, very long time. He had walked 12 warships into a position that looked like a trap, only after the door had already closed. The open channel crackled. Commander Oren's voice came through again. It was still quiet. It was still calm. There was no triumph in it. No shout, no speech. No attempt to make the moment dramatic. It was just a person speaking plainly to another person across a short distance. "Admiral Seth Carr. My name is Commander Yael Oren. I represent the United Earth Strategic Command." A short pause. "We're not here to fight you. We've never wanted to fight you. I want to make that very clear." Another pause. "But I think it's time we had an honest conversation. The kind of conversation that should have happened a long time ago." Her voice was steady, not cold, not angry. "If you're ready to listen, we'd like to talk." The channel stayed open. The 10 human ships did not move. Their weapons stayed folded. Their engines stayed at low power. They waited. On the Eternal Accord, Admiral Sethar sat slowly back down into his chair. He looked at the screen. He looked at 10 ships that had not existed in his world 20 minutes ago. He thought about the treaty in his data cores heading to the signing chamber. He thought about 60 years of conclave decisions about humanity. He thought about every time the word Class 3 had been used like a closed door. Ice's voice was only heard inside the pale meridian. Quiet and dry, and perfectly timed. They never updated their threat library to include us. Oversight on their part. Very intentional on ours. Oren did not smile this time. She just waited. The corridor was still 10 human ships and 12 conclave warships face to face in dead space. The galaxy holding its breath. The emergency session of the Galactic Conclave High Chamber was called within 6 hours of the incident in the Vitha corridor. Normally, it took days to gather a full session, but when Admiral Seth Carrar's compressed report reached the capital station, 12 warships surrounded, 10 unknown human vessels uncloaked, convoy held motionless for 9 minutes, without a trace of how the chamber filled quickly. Word traveled fast when the word was alarming. The chamber was a large circular room, with seats arranged in rings around a central floor. The oldest and most powerful conclave species sat in the inner rings. The newer species, the smaller ones, the ones the conclave treated as less important, sat in the outer rings. There were no human seats. There had never been human seats. Every seat that existed was full. The council leader, an elderly Vori named First Voice Danu, stood at the center and tried to keep her voice steady as she summarized what they knew. 10 human warships of unknown class, cloaking technology that had no signature on any instrument. The conclave owned a jamming field that left no trace. Intelligence suggesting the human vessels had been in position in the Vaitha corridor for at least 72 hours before revealing themselves. And this part was delivered slowly and carefully. Initial analysis of the data cores from the Eternal Accord had found no missing files, no altered data, nothing out of place. That last part, she noted, was somehow more disturbing than if something had been taken. The chamber erupted while the conclave argued. Its intelligence division was doing what intelligence divisions do in a crisis, going back through everything they thought they knew and looking for what they had missed. The results came in pieces, each one worse than the last. Human observation posts, small, passive, almost completely undetectable. 3 of them had been found near conclave border systems by analysts who only found them because they knew to look very carefully now. The posts had no weapons. They did nothing except watch and record. But they had been there, it was estimated, for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. A human-built relay network, deep space, quantum encrypted, running between points so distant from conclave patrol routes that it had never been swept. The network had almost certainly been recording transmissions from conclave diplomatic sessions, not military sessions, not weapons planning diplomatic sessions. Every high chamber meeting for 30 years may have been heard, and then the one that made the room truly quiet. Human operatives, not spies, not soldiers, people. Humans who had taken jobs in conclave trade guilds, logistics companies, supply networks. Unremarkable jobs. Jobs that no one watched because no one thought a class. 3 species would have the patience, or the organization, to place people in those positions and wait. Most of them had done nothing for years, except work and listen. But what they had heard, and what they had sent back, added up over decades into a picture of the conclave's plans that was nearly complete. Humanity had not built a fleet in secret and gotten lucky. They had built an entire shadow infrastructure, quiet, slow, patient, invisible. And they had built it specifically because they knew what the conclave was planning. And they knew they had no other choice. One of the inner ring council members, a heavy-set Callan named Orvith, slammed his hand on his console. "This is an act of war." "Against whom?" said a voice from the outer ring. The chamber turned. The voice had come from a young senator named Aya, a Sen, one of the smaller species, one of the ones who sat in the outer ring, where the seats were narrower and the lighting was worse. She was not old enough to have much standing in the chamber, but she had a reputation for saying things plainly that others wrapped in careful language. "Against whom?" she said again, standing slowly. They surrounded a convoy that was carrying a treaty designed to close off their future without telling them. They held 12 of our warships without damaging one of them or harming one crew member. They could have taken the treaty. They could have destroyed the convoy. They did neither. They asked to talk. She looked at Orth. Which part of that is an act of war? The silence that followed was not agreement, but it was not immediate argument either. 62 years ago, a woman named Sira Voss had stood in this same chamber. She had been Earth's senior diplomatic representative, a title that carried no voting rights and no guaranteed speaking time. But she had been given the floor that day as a courtesy. She was tall and dark-eyed, with the kind of stillness that people sometimes mistake for shyness, but is actually the opposite. She had stood at the center floor and spoken for 8 minutes. She had spoken about humanity's history, not its wars, not its mistakes, which the conclave already used as reasons to keep humans out, but about its capacity to survive, to adapt, to keep going, when the reasonable choice was to stop. She had spoken about the human need to be part of something larger than itself, and the genuine desire to contribute to a galaxy that had so far refused to let them in. She had made her case clearly, calmly, and with full dignity. When she finished, there had been a pause, and then from the inner ring, laughter. Not from everyone, but from enough. The comfortable, dismissive laughter of people who have already decided the answer and find the question itself amusing. Sarah Voss had looked at the people laughing. She had not cried. She had not raised her voice. She had looked at them for a long moment, in complete silence. Then she had nodded once, gathered her papers, and walked out of the chamber. She had gone home to Earth. She had written a letter to the office that handled deep space development projects. The letter was short. It proposed a classified program funded through multiple layers of misdirection for the long-term development of human strategic capability. Not to attack, not to conquer, to defend, to make sure that when the Conclave finally decided to close the door on humanity permanently, humanity would have the ability to say no. She called it Project Pale Light. She was dead now, had been for 11 years. But her program was alive, and it was floating in the Vithara corridor in the shape of 10 dark ships with folded weapons and an open comm channel. Back in the high chamber, the debate had been going for 2 hours and had gone in circles 3 times. The intelligence reports were still coming in, and each one made the circle wider. A Vori general was insisting on a military response. Ortholon was backing him. 3 other inner ring members were arguing for caution. The outer ring was mostly quiet, listening. Ayla, the young Sen senator, had sat back down after her question about the act of war. She had been listening carefully to everything being said. She had been paying particular attention to the intelligence reports, not the parts that made the Conclave look threatened, but the parts that described what humanity had actually built. Defensive posts, recording systems, ships that had been close enough to destroy things and hadn't, a jamming field that had been switched off cleanly, leaving 12 Conclave vessels completely unharmed. She raised her hand and stood again. The chamber gave her the floor more quickly this time, perhaps because no one else had a good answer. "I want to ask one question," she said. "Just one." She looked around the room, the inner ring, the generals, the politicians, all the people who had for 60 years decided what humanity was and what humanity deserved. If they have all of this, the ships, the network, the fleet, 30 years of our meetings recorded, and they still came to us asking to talk. She paused. She let the questions sit in the air. What does that tell us about them? The chamber went quiet. Not the nervous quiet of people waiting for the next argument. The deeper quiet of people who have heard something they will have to think about for a long time. First voice. Danu looked at the senator for a moment. Then she looked down at the table in front of her. Then she said in a voice that was older and more tired than she usually let it sound, "It tells us we have been wrong about them for a very long time." No one laughed. The negotiating table was not in a conclave chamber. It was not on a capital station, or a neutral planet, or any of the official places where galactic politics had always been decided. It was in the briefing room of the ISV Pale Meridian, now fully revealed, dark-holded and clean-lined, docked at a point in the Vitha corridor, that Commander Oren had chosen herself. The choice of location was deliberate. Humanity had spent 60 years going to the Conclave's rooms, sitting in the Conclave chairs, speaking to the Conclave schedules. Today, the Conclave was coming to them. It was a small thing, maybe, but small things matter in diplomacy. They are often the only honest language left after the large things have been said. The Conclave had sent 4 representatives. First voice Danu came herself, which surprised people because she was old and the trip was not comfortable, but she had insisted. Admiral Sethar was also there, which surprised no one, because he had requested it, and because refusing him would have caused more trouble than it was worth. The other 2 were Orv the Khan, and at the last moment, and at the quiet suggestion of First Voice Danu herself, Senator Aya of the Sen, Commander Oren met them at the docking port. She was wearing no uniform, just plain dark clothes with no insignia. She had 3 people with her, 2 others from her crew, and a man she introduced simply as Dr. Fenn, who carried a flat case under one arm, and said very little. Oren led them through the ship. The Conclave representatives looked at everything at the clean corridors. The equipment they did not recognize, the crew members, who moved with quiet purpose and did not stop to stare at the visitors, but also did not avoid looking at them. Oren did not offer a tour or an explanation. She simply walked and they followed, and the ship told its own story, just by being what it was. The briefing room was small and plain. A table, chairs, a screen on one wall that was currently dark, water in simple containers, nothing else. They sat down. Oren did not begin with accusations. She did not begin with a history lesson, or a list of grievances, or a speech about all the ways humanity had been treated poorly over 6 decades. She had thought carefully about what to say first, and what she chose was this. Thank you for coming. It was simple. It was genuine. It surprised all 4 of the conclave representatives in different ways. Then she opened the meeting the same way. We are not here to punish anyone. We are not here to make demands at the end of a gun. If we wanted that, we had the opportunity 3 days ago, and we chose not to take it. She looked around the table. We are here because we want a future that works for everyone, and we think that is actually possible. If the people in this room decide it is Admiral Sethar, who had come prepared for confrontation, found himself with nothing to push against. He was not sure what to do with that. He sat back and was quiet. First voice. Danu looked at Oren for a long moment. Then she said, "You know about the century binding. We have known for 2 years." Danu nodded slowly. "Then you know what we intended." "Yes," Oren said. "And you should know that the treaty is already changed. The version in your data course is no longer the version that was written. The team I sent aboard your ship adjusted it." She said it plainly without apology, but also without pride. "We did not steal it. We did not destroy it. We gave it back to you fixed." Seth Karar's jaw tightened. "That is not your right." "No," Oren agreed. "It isn't. And you do not have the right to close off a species' future without telling them. We are both operating outside the rules here. The difference is that one of us had no other choice." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Fenn, who had said nothing so far, placed the flat case on the table and opened it. Inside was a single document printed on plain paper bound simply. He slid it to the center of the table. "This is what we came to offer," Oren said. The document was called the Open Charter. It was 41 pages. It had been written by a team of human legal scholars, diplomats, historians, and philosophers over the course of 8 years. It had been reviewed more times than anyone could count. Every sentence had been debated, reconsidered, and debated again. It proposed a restructured galactic conclave. Not destroyed, restructured. The core of the old conclave could remain. The chamber, the council, the systems that worked, but the species rating system. Class 1, Class 2, Class 3. The hierarchy that had kept certain species at the center and others at the edge for 400 years would be replaced with a simple equal-standing membership. Every species with a permanent presence in space, 1 seat, 1 vote, equal floor access. There were financial provisions to rebalancing of trade rights, removal of the restrictions that had quietly kept smaller species dependent on conclave infrastructure. There were security provisions, a joint defense framework that did not require any species to give up its own fleet, but created a cooperative response structure for shared threats. And there were transition provisions, acknowledgements that change this large takes time, timelines, review periods, space to move slowly. It was not a weapon, it was not an ultimatum, it was a plan. Danu read the first 10 pages while the room waited. Then she looked up. "You had 30 years to plan this. We did. And in all that time, this is what you chose to build. Not weapons, not a blockade. The weapons were necessary. The weapons were necessary," Oren said quietly. "We want to be clear about that. We built them because we had to, but they were never the goal. They were the thing that made sure we could still be here to have this conversation." She looked at the document in Danu's hands. "That is the goal." Danu set the charter down carefully. She looked at it. Then she looked at Oren. "You said the treaty in our data cores has already been changed." "Yes." "What does it say now?" Oren nodded at Dr. Fenn. He brought out a second page, a summary, just 1 sheet, and passed it across the table. Danu read it. The century binding in its altered form no longer restricted human expansion. It no longer blocked membership applications. The clause that made future membership nearly impossible had been replaced with a straightforward review process that any species could pass with reasonable effort. It was, in short, a treaty that did no harm and asked for nothing unreasonable. "Why did you do it this way?" Sethar asked. He was not angry anymore. He sounded like someone trying to understand something. "Why not just reveal yourselves earlier? Why all of this?" Commander Oren looked at him. She answered simply, "Because we did not want to fight. Every option that let us avoid a fight, we took." The Shadow Network was listening, not acting. The observation posts were watching, not targeting. The jamming field stopped your ships, not destroyed them. We tried for 60 years to do this through the front door. When the front door was being locked permanently, we found another way in. She paused. And we are still right now trying to walk through the front door. We just needed you to actually open it. Senator Aya, who had been listening to every word with careful attention, spoke for the first time. The 4 species whose signatures are already on the charter. Which ones are they? Oren told her. 2 were well-known mid-sized species with decent fleets and good standing. Not Conclave Inner Circle, but not ignored either. The other 2 were small species. Outer Ring, the kind of species whose names were sometimes forgotten at council meetings. All 4 had been approached quietly over the last 3 years, given honest information about what humanity had built and what humanity wanted, and asked if they were interested in a different kind of arrangement. All 4 had said yes without hesitation. A nodded slowly. You didn't come alone, she said. We haven't been alone for a while, Oren said. We were just the only ones with the resources to build the thing that got us into this room. The signing did not happen that day. It took 3 more weeks of formal discussion, review, and back and forth between the Pale Meridian and the Conclave capital. There were arguments. Some Conclave members refused entirely and made loud speeches about sovereignty and precedent. Others surprised everyone by signing early and urging others to follow. In the end, enough signed. The open charter was ratified on a Tuesday morning, station time. In a quiet ceremony that was not dramatic, pens on paper, voices confirming a new thing becoming official, humanity took its seat at the center table. Not at the edge, not in the back row, at the center, alongside every other equal member, with a vote that counted the same as anyone else's. Months later, a junior analyst in the Conclave Intelligence Division was assigned to write a complete assessment of human strategic capability. It had been requested by the new Joint Security Council as part of the transition process. The analyst was thorough. She read everything. Every report, every intercepted document, every sensor log from the Vitha corridor incident. She interviewed 3 people who had been on Conclave ships that day. She studied the cloaking technology as best she could, with the incomplete data available. The final report was 40 pages long. It covered the fleet, the observation network, the relay systems, the data collection, the construction timeline, the political planning. It was detailed and well-written, and completely thorough. The reviewing admiral who read it wrote 1 note by hand, in the margin of the last page. He wrote it because he wanted someone someday to understand what the real lesson was, not the technical lesson, the actual one. He wrote, "We had 100 years to know them. We chose not to. We will not make that mistake again." The ISV Pale Meridian was recommissioned. It was given new markings, the emblem of the United Earth Strategic Command on its hull. And beside it, small but present, the new emblem of the Open Charter Conclave. It was assigned as the official vessel of Earth's first High Ambassador, a woman named Dr. Fenn's daughter, who had grown up hearing about Sarah Voss, and had chosen to become a diplomat because of it. On the day it docked at the Conclave Capital Station for the first time in its new role, Eris patched through on open comms a channel heard by every ship, every station, every officer in range. It said nothing important. It did not need to. It simply said in its flat, dry, perfectly timed voice, "Next time, scan the freighter." On 12 Conclave warships and 3 capital stations, someone who had been there that day in the Vithura corridor heard those words and felt something they did not entirely have a name for, something between embarrassment and respect, something that, given enough time, might grow into something better. The Pale Meridian docked cleanly, its engines cooled. The galaxy, for the first time in a very long time, had some thinking to bear.